Hello and welcome to the Management Under Construction podcast. I'm Brad Wyant,
And I'm Dee Davis.
and today we're going to be talking about the power grid, your power bill, and why do energy bills keep going up? So this is going to be a two-part episode. In part one, we're going to discuss the reason that energy bills are on the rise, how energy use has changed over time, and a brief history of how energy has been billed in the past. We're going to discuss things like how renewables and green energy policies have and continue to impact the cost of energy today. Then in part two, we're going to discuss some of the different ways that consumers see energy usage on their bills now. We're going to compare the rates and methods in different parts of the United States. And we're going to talk about what you can do to positively impact your energy bill. So Dee, what is your background with the grid? How did you become educated about it?
Well, I started learning about how the energy grid works back in the early 2000s. I was building cogeneration plants. A cogeneration plant creates its own power and sends power back to the grid, is what it really does. I built a number of cogeneration plants in various parts of San Diego, some pretty big ones on some college campuses and in various areas of the city. In that, I was working with the utility a lot. It was before solar became really big, selling excess power back to the grid, being able to buy power if our cogeneration plant was not capable of producing enough at a particular moment for the need of the client. And I worked with some just incredibly smart people. I got to see this software that just shows everything that's going on with the grid, where all the power's coming from, where's it going to, how is it priced. It was really an incredible experience. And it spurred my interest in learning more about where does all this energy come from? How do we manage it all? It's very complicated. And you add things like renewable energy, like solar and wind, and individual consumers producing their own, and it gets very, very complicated very quickly. We're not going to get super deep into those weeds for you here today. We are going to be taking some of that information that we have, we're going to be touching on it on a higher level. I see people constantly just so frustrated saying, I've done everything I was supposed to do. I did all the energy retrofits, but my bill keeps going up. What the heck is happening? That's the question that I want to help answer. Whether you're a residential customer or you're a commercial customer, the answers are very much the same. So we will dive into some of that. I did spend an entire year doing nothing but studying the power grid in California at that particular time. And then I spent another year studying nothing but water, where it comes from and how it moves around the state in California. So lots of my information is based on what is happening in California specifically. But since then, I have started studying it in other states as well.
Whole lot of expertise there. Very excited.
I am a very, very tiny amount compared to so many people that I know in the industry, just live and breathe this all day, every day. So we're going to give you what you need to know and some really cool information that you may not know about how all this stuff works. So whether you're a commercial energy user or a residential one, energy is going to be a huge part of your monthly expenses. If you're a residential user, it could be 10 to 25% of your overall utility bills, and it can be 30 to 45% if you're a commercial user. So let's see what's going on with these energy bills and why conservation is really only a piece of the story. So there's 5 main reasons why your bills don't ever go down. Have you ever had an energy bill go down, like all of a sudden you got a big discount for some reason? Did that ever happen to you, Brad?
No, that's never happened to me, Dee.
It doesn't happen to anyone. One of the main reasons for changes that we've seen in the last 30 years, I started off just picking 30 out of the air. And when I started doing research, it turns out that was actually a really good time frame to pick. There's lots and lots of data available on what's changed in the last 30 years. Technology is the number one reason why things are different today than they were 30 years ago. Is we have a vast expansion of electrical use for things that are everyday in today's world that didn't even exist 30 years ago or were very uncommon 30 years ago. So the things in our daily lives are one of the biggest reasons. Regulation and commercialization of the utility industry happened a while back. We'll touch on that. Confusion of how energy is billed. We're going to go into some depth on that, especially in part two, and the constantly changing way that it's billed. And then the energy landscape, just what's really going on out there in the world, and how decarbonization and some of the modern things that we're doing are greatly impacting our ability to produce and consume energy. You've lived in various parts of the country like I have, Brad. What have you seen and experienced as your time as a utility bill payer?
In what short time I've been paying utility bills. California has been way more expensive than anywhere I've lived, but the winters in Michigan, where I lived most recently before now, were a lot more expensive than I thought they were going to be. I was used to California. I was used to even Colorado, where it's so sunny that during the winter you don't have to pay all that much for heating. But with the lack of sunlight in Michigan, I was paying a lot more than I used to in the winter, probably twice as much as I used to pay in the winters in Michigan. So other than that, though, it was such a small fraction of my cost living in apartments and other small buildings. It was not something I thought about a ton as I looked down the barrel of trying to own a piece of property one day and look at things like the monthly recurring costs, property taxes, water bills, and electricity bills. You have to really consider, do you want a house with 10-foot ceilings? Because that's going to have a lot more of an energy bill than a house with 8-foot ceilings. Or the apartment I'm in now has these gorgeous 12, 14-foot ceilings with a big, beautiful skylight, but it gets up to 80 degrees in here in a hurry. And I try to cool it down to 76, and I'm sure that that's costing my landlord a lot. But luckily, I've fixed myself into a 150 flat for water, gas, and electricity, which in California is not too bad for a space as big as this.
Especially in the area that you're in. That's great. You did, in preparation for this podcast, send me a couple of your utility bills from when you were in Michigan. I wanted to see what the price point was compared to some of the other ones that I had to compare to. I saw that you had electricity and gas on those bills. Do you happen to know if your heating was gas or electric?
The heat was gas, yeah.
Okay, so you're using a lot more gas, and gas is typically cheaper than electric, but you were using a lot more gas in the wintertime, it sounds like. Probably something you weren't used to doing.
Definitely.
Your local utility is who delivers to your home or your business, but that's really only a tiny little piece of the picture. So without getting really deep in the weeds, and I swear I'm not going to here, there's three main parts of the power grid: the generation, the transmission, and the distribution. So let's do a really quick overview of what those mean. The generation is, not surprisingly, where the power is generated. The power grid in the United States is pretty massive, but it's only somewhat connected. There's a huge section in the east and another huge section in the west, and Texas is all by itself in the middle. They pulled out of the rest of the country's power union in 1935 when the Federal Power Act was passed and regulation of the power industry started. So everybody else is kind of doing the same thing, and Texas is doing their own thing. Power plants generate in large quantities. So it's measured in what we call megawatts. A megawatt is 1 million watts, and a power plant might generate somewhere between 500 and 750 megawatts of power. So a whole bunch. Super fun historical fact is the very first power plant that was ever built was built on Pearl Street in Manhattan, New York, in 1882. Before that, no power plants.
America first.
You don't really usually live super close to a power plant, so that means that power has to travel a long way to get to you, the user. That's where the transmission comes in. So it's generated over here, it's transmitted across a long distance to get to where you are and get to your local area. That could be hundreds or even thousands of miles, depending on where you are on the planet. So because it has to travel such a long distance, we have what is called transmission loss. So if I generate a megawatt of power at a power plant 100 miles away, I don't get a megawatt by the time it travels 100 miles. I lose a bunch of that electricity along the way, and that's called transmission loss. So what that really ends up meaning is you have to do a lot of math and estimating to figure out how much you need to generate, then get it to where it needs to go, and how much do you actually end up with at the end of the line when you go to flip your switch.
Dee, I once read somewhere that power losses can be as high as 33% in transmission, that you can make a megawatt and only end up using 666 kilowatts. Is that true? Is it really a 33% loss?
Yes, it absolutely is. It can be even more than that. But yes, in general, I would say on average, it's somewhere in that neighborhood. It's a lot. I put together a class on electricity, how it works, how it's used, and we get into like really painful detail on all this kind of stuff, but it's not a simple one-to-one ratio. So I've had people ask me the question, I don't understand why they can't figure out how much power we need. When I turn on my switch, why is it such a big deal? Why can't they just figure it out? Why are there days where we have brownouts or blackouts or we have all these issues? Well, they're generating it way over here. It's being used way over here. And a whole lot happens in between, not just transmission loss, but are your lights on or off? Is your air conditioner on or off? And there's a billion of those in between where it's generated and where it ends up. And so all those things matter. The utility providers actually do have a very hard job. And it's a little mind boggling when you really start getting into the weeds and thinking about it.
The intelligence and coordination required to generate just the right amount of power. Because if you generate too much power, that starts to have very bad consequences. And if you generate too little power, that obviously brownout and blackout is what you get. The demand matching that has to go on at these plants that ramp up and down. The people that do that job are some of the most stressed people I've ever met. They're shaking with their cup of coffee every morning and they're just mellowing out at night. Every day
this is an area where AI and predictive modeling can be very, very helpful in learning trends and predicting when demand will go up, when demand will go down. You have to put it together with weather because now we have wind and solar in the mix. Is wind going to be blowing? Is it not going to be blowing? Is the sun going to be covered up by clouds? What time does the sun go down today? It's highly complicated. I don't know if I would want that job, to be honest with you.
Yeah, not only do you have to be somebody who can predict what people are going to do when they're going to turn their microwave on, now you have to be a weatherman. You have to figure out what's going to happen with all those solar panels out in the desert and how they're going to be impacted by random clouds and what the wind's going to do. It's a tough, tough job.
Yeah, for sure. As consumers, we pretty much just deal with the local utility. They're responsible for delivery, maintaining local lines, providing billing, and customer service to the client. And your utility, wherever you are, only serves your specific area. Where Brad is right now, his power company is different than the power company is where I'm sitting. So that's who we pay. So that's who we tend to be mad at. When the bill comes and we see it and we go, oh my God, my bill is so high. We're mad at the utility company. We're screaming at the utility company, but there is so much more to it. There's lots and lots that happens before it ever gets to the utility company. But, there is some interesting, I'm going to say some questionable things that happen at the utility level too. If you are a commercial client, oftentimes you are assigned by your utility company an account representative, which is an individual human person that you can talk to on a consistent basis about your utility bill and how you can do better in your particular facility. I've worked with lots of energy representatives for commercial clients.
Are there examples of things that you would think would help reduce your bill that don't end up actually having all that big a difference? Like, let's say I'm a store owner and I want to put my neon sign on 24 hours because I want it to advertise for me even when I'm not at my business. But then I think, well, how much money could I save? How much good could I do for the planet if I turn it off between midnight and 6 a.m.? Is that something that would have a big impact on my bill or wouldn't have a big impact on my bill as a business owner?
Probably have a minor impact on your bill, but it might be cumulative with a bunch of other things that are going on in your business.
Mm.
I see lots and lots of businesses, they might as well light their money on fire. The way air conditioning units blowing full blast and their front door is propped open. I see that all the time. I
Wow.
mean, every single summer, every time I go into a shopping area, I will see at least some stores doing that. Well, they want the doors open to welcome the customers in. And I tell you, as a customer, when it's blazing hot outside, you want to walk in that store and that AC feels good. But I'm telling you, that person is lighting $100 bills on fire to make that happen. And it just kills me
I can see my
how much
father
energy
saying,
there.
I'm not paying to refrigerate the outdoors. Close the darn door. That's crazy to me that business owners would do that. Oh,
Oh yeah, I see it all the time. And believe it or not, we're going to talk about who has the highest energy rates here in a little bit. Hint, hint, it's Hawaii. And I see it in Hawaii all the time. I
yeah.
believe in the Honolulu airport, if I remember correctly. It was open to the outside. There wasn't even a way to close it off, blasting air conditioning.
Oh,
And I just thought, you've got to be kidding me. And I'm going to tell you how much they're paying per kilowatt hour
mm.
for energy here pretty soon.
Hawaii pays so much for everything. I was looking at a job out there once, and the cost of milk was like 3.5 times what it is anywhere else. I was like, I don't know.
I
That's a
lived there
lot.
for a while, I know.
Oh, you did? That's
I,
awful.
I was stationed there in the Navy for a little bit. So yeah, everything's imported. How we use energy now versus how we use energy in the past. You were a kid much more recently when I was a kid. We have a whole different world today. So let's just pause for a second and think about we power today that we plug in today that we really didn't 30 years ago. And things that we either didn't have at all or just were not nearly as common. Household things like multiple laptops, cell phones, tablets. Every single person in my house has one of each. I think that's
Yep,
most houses,
if not more.
right? Or more. Yeah, maybe more. I used to have a work phone and a personal phone when I worked for somebody else. Maybe you have a personal laptop and a work laptop. You're plugging all this stuff in every single day to charge it or while you're using it or whatever. And I have a ring light right here while I'm recording to make me look better. You know, I didn't even have that 5 years ago. We have televisions in every room. Every bedroom in my house has a television plus a living room. We have electric cars, electric bikes, printers, smartphone, smart homes. I'm sitting in a home that was built as a smart home and I made it a dumb home. It took some work, let me tell you. All these smart devices. Do you have an Alexa or something like that in your house?
I do. I have
Okay.
the one with a screen so I can read recipes on it.
Okay. And a lot of people have that kind of stuff. My siblings all have it. Almost everybody I know has some kind of thing like that in their house. Well, those things are designed to be plugged in and turned on 24 hours a day. They're listening for you to say the magic words all day long. So they must be plugged in, they must be turned on. Your Wi-Fi router is the same way. Now, I no longer have Wi-Fi in this house, but when I did, what I have is a little mini IT closet that's always on, though.
Mm.
All that stuff has to be plugged in and turned on all the time. So if you think about all the things in your house that are Wi-Fi enabled or smart in any way, those things didn't exist 30 years ago. They're all plugged in now. They're all turned on all the time now. When I go to my daughter's house, this cracks me up. I can operate the fans, the lights, the music, and a whole bunch of other stuff in her house with just talking to the darn thing. And it's super cool, but it's totally unnecessary. It's using a ton of energy. We call those vampire loads. They're things that are plugged in and on and ready at all times, but you're not using them. They're called vampire loads because individually, each one of those things, that neon sign, that Wi-Fi router, that cell phone charger, they're plugged in and they're drawing energy even when you're not using it. So individually, it's not a ton, but collectively, it can actually be 50% or more of your bill.
And I've seen at the hardware store those timers that you put on Christmas lights where they switch on at a certain time, they switch off at another time. And I've thought about trying to use something like that on a Wi-Fi router or on another device, but that's $20 that I'm going to go spend on one of those pieces of plastic a couple times for all the different things that I have in my home. And B, I'm just not sure how much power I can save. I mean, how much energy am I really spending on my Wi-Fi router? My power bill doesn't tell me. I could go online and I could Google the device and try to get wattage and amperage and draw and things like that. But then that's a bunch of work and laundry's piling up. This is too early for this question, but how do you recommend consumers approach these kinds of optimizations if that's what they're thinking about trying to do?
There absolutely are strategies like timers and power strips that we can use for these kinds of things. You are getting a little ahead of me there. That's okay, we'll get there. But there are strategies that you can use to manage those vampire loads. If we have 100 things that are plugged into our house and we're only using a few of them at a time, do we go around and unplug 95 things? Maybe that's possible, maybe that's not realistic, but there's some other ways we can do that. And we'll talk about that at the end of part 2. What we're looking at now is things that are plugged in all the time, like toasters and can openers and phone chargers and mixers and printers and scanners and DVD players that are not used more than they are used. Those are the things that we got to think about as we're starting to formulate these questions about what can I do differently than I'm doing now. I changed all my light bulbs to LED. Everybody kind of knows that one, right? And then we'll talk about some more strategies as we go along. Back to the power industry, the business of supplying the public with power. Regulation and commercialization, as I said, started in the late 30s. It has gotten extraordinarily complicated. I'm not even going to try to delve deeply into the regulation thing because you go from 0 to 100 feet deep really, really quickly on that topic. Suffice it to say that the business of providing energy to the public is a for-profit business. Make no mistake, it is a for-profit business. So when you say, oh, those guys are making a bunch of money off me, yes, they are. They have shareholders. You can buy stock in energy companies. They're publicly held utilities. So you can go buy stock if whatever your power company is, whoever's your main supplier is, you can go buy stock and it will do very well over time. My brother-in-law inherited a whole bunch of stock that his parents had invested in back in the day. The regulatory agencies, their job is to regulate a super interesting balance of serving the public and serving the shareholders at the same time.
I'm not saying that nobody should make any money running a utility, but I just think it's interesting to have the conversation of whether telling a company you need to optimize profit when optimizing profit may not be in the public interest. There's an interesting trade-off there. Let's say, for instance, you live in a wildfire-prone state and you don't want to cut the budget for preventing wildfires, for going out and doing the proactive thing that is required to maintain the systems that prevent that. Without getting too deep into the weeds, a lot of people feel a lot of different ways on that. And I think I certainly lean towards the if you find a way for somebody to be able to make money at it side of the argument, then people are going to do it really well. You just have to regulate them so they don't lie, cheat, and steal. But I certainly hear the people on the other side of the argument that say, no, let's go communism, let's go Marx, let's get it all publicly owned. It's a interesting debate to have, but I know where I stand.
Yeah. Like I said, it gets very, very complicated very quickly. For 1 minute, a number of years ago, I started getting into some of these regulation topics and quickly realized that you're either in the deep end and thorough understanding of all this stuff, or you're just on the surface going, what's going on? It's really hard to be in between. There's a lot of time and energy has to be invested into fully understanding it, and it's a moving target. It's constantly changing. So, by the way, in fire prone states, there's a line item on your electric utility bill that is a wildfire prevention, and it's a percentage of your bill, just FYI. Go look for that. We get the nickel and diming. There's how much you're paying per kilowatt hour is a piece of your bill, but the whole rest of your bill is fees. And we'll talk about what those ratios look like here shortly. We usually see there's some states and some jurisdictions that do a great job, I think, or a better job in balancing the cost increases, and the regulatory authorities will force the utilities to do things like buy fire prevention helicopters, provide free education and resources to their clientele. I've been the beneficiary of dozens of free education seminars put on by the local utility because I found out they were doing it. And I'm like, I get to go learn this stuff for free? Excellent. I might have even taken all my CEM classes for my certified energy manager classes for free through the local utility. All I had to do was pay to take the test. If you know where to go and you know where to dig, you can get a ton of stuff for free. Before I got solar on my house, I went and learned all about solar panels, the difference between all the different kinds, how to size them properly so I could design my own system. So there's lots of free stuff out there, and these regulatory agencies are forcing the utilities to do this kind of stuff to help offset some of the fee increases and things like that that happen. We see is very few people taking advantage of that stuff. So wherever you are on planet Earth, I highly recommend that you get onto your utilities website and find out what they have. And whether it's your energy utility, your water utility, your gas utility, find out what they've got available for free. You might be surprised. And you can take advantage of, rebates. Replaced a refrigerator or a freezer, got a rebate. Replaced a washer and dryer, got a rebate. All kinds of stuff that you can do.
And I would just say that the people who do that for a living, even though you may not think of them very often, are some of the smartest people on the face of the planet. The job of getting power to your house is immensely challenging and requires such deep and varied skills. Just to hang out with some of these people that do this job, even if you're not a nerd about your own power or you're not concerned about your own power bill, just go learn. Learning is fun, and learning will be a good use of your time no matter what you're learning. But these people are pretty cool to learn from, I think.
Yeah, I've learned massive stuff, and yes, you're right. Very, very smart people hang around there, and I've been very grateful to learn from them over the years. Some jurisdictions and states don't do as much, but check it out in your local area and see how you can benefit, because you might be surprised. A lot of times they will pay for your upgrades if you fill out the right form. Where most people start seeing regulation come through is rate increases. What a shock. And again, when was the last time you saw a rate decrease? And I researched it, by the way. Are there ever rate decreases? In the commercial and industrial sector, there have been a couple of dips, but very slight dips over the last 30 years. Basically, the trend is up as far as cost per kilowatt hour. Changes in how rates are calculated, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit of depth. Time of use, tiers, seasonal, peak pricing, all these kinds of fun little words, and playing little games with how we're calculating and defining these things is managed by regulatory and approved by regulatory agencies. And incentives and rebates to users. So if you ever bought an EV and you got an EV incentive, that's how that's happening. It's through solar, appliance upgrades, and if it's your water utility, water use reduction.
A funny story to interject here. One of the things I got to do during my MBA program was to run a 2-day conference where we got to talk about sustainability and energy. And one of the big companies that sponsored was Chevron. And Chevron executives came and we got to hang out with them and talk. And one of the things we talked about was increasing cost of power. And one of them said, well, why would you expect the cost to go down? We already took out all of the easy natural gas, all of the cheap natural gas. No one's going after the expensive natural gas first. Now, every next time that we sink a well or we drill into something, it's harder than it was before to get to that stuff because we already got all the easy stuff, which was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It's like, duh, no wonder my power bill keeps going up.
That's a fair statement. And it's something that I never really thought about either. You just have the very skeptical things never go down, they always go up, right? Well, yeah, especially when you're talking about something like that. Yeah, the easy stuff was already harvested.
Yeah.
You're digging for that. So that's interesting. Good one.
And unlike areas of the economy like computer science, where we follow Moore's law and we get twice the computing power every 2 years, we're not getting twice the drilling efficiency into hard rock every 2 years. It's just about as hard as it was 40 years ago to drill through the earth to get out the oil.
Absolutely. In fact, I just bought a 10 pack of thumb drives, and I think they're like 64 gig thumb drives.
Yeah.
I remember you could barely put anything on a thumb drive when they first came out. It's full. Oh, okay. You got to put it on 4 different things. And now my whole computer would probably fit on one of these thumb drives. It's crazy. So, how energy is billed? We're going to go over how it used to be billed and maybe how it's still billed in some areas. It depends on where you are. But this is where we started. And looking at some energy bills that I've gotten to look at from across the country in the last few weeks, some places are still doing it this way, which is a good thing. I call it the Wayback Machine. So if you go on the Wayback Machine 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever, we were charged a straight rate for energy usage by kilowatt. So it's called a kilowatt hour, or kWh, on your bill. It's a measurement of energy usage over time is what that is. And that's the hour part of it. So if you had a light bulb that was 100 watts and you burned it for 10 hours, you would have used 1 kilowatt hour. So back in the day, if your house used 150 kilowatt hours that month, you were being charged was a flat 5 cents per kilowatt hour. Your bill for energy usage would have been 150 times 0.05, or $7.50. Very straightforward. There might have been a few taxes and some other fees added in. Maybe your whole bill was a whopping $8.50. Fast forward a bit to 1998. The average residential rate jumped to 8.26 cents per kilowatt hour in the United States. Commercial rates about 7.5 cents, industrial rates about 4.5 cents. So you'll notice here that commercial and industrial customers are paying less per kilowatt hour because they're using larger amounts than everybody else. So think of it a little bit like a bulk discount rate that you might get. We don't get that as residential customers. By 2008, the average energy rate jumped almost 40% from where we started at a nickel per kilowatt hour. By 2018, residential averages were up to 1287, which is another 14%. So we already went up 40%. Now we've gone up another 14%. So it was fairly stable for commercial and a slight drop for industrial. But for us residential folks, we've had more than a 50% increase in unit cost over 20 years. And you haven't seen anything yet. Hold on to your shorts because it just gets better. At the close of 2024, residential customers were averaging 16.4 cents per kilowatt hour, a 99% increase from the unit rates in 1998. That's a period of 26 years. In 26 years, the rate per kilowatt hour has doubled. This is not talking about fees or any of the other regulatory things. This is just straight cost per kilowatt hour. And this is an average across the US. Places like Hawaii are paying 4 times that.
Well, I'd be curious to see what areas of the country are paying more than the average increase and which ones are paying less than the average increase. I would think that the areas that have continued to grow, population centers, are probably paying more than the average because the need to get more base load to those areas has grown. And by base load, that's a term that I've only learned about recently in the power world. It's the minimum amount that any given area draws. So let's say in Seattle in 1990, microwaves were the biggest draw. There weren't all the things we were talking about earlier, Wi-Fi routers and printers and all those kinds of things in the home computers. But then by 2010, 2020, we've got all those things in the home. So base load, the amount of power consumption in the home has gone up a ton. That base load means there's got to be more distribution to that area. So all of a sudden, you've had to double the number of poles between your power plants and that urban area. So that kind of investment, that kind of time that would take to do that, the project management of that all, yeah, that's going to cost an awful lot of money, but still twice the rate. Oof.
Yeah, the reasons why these things are happening in that 30-year window are wide and deep. We're going to talk about some of those, and we've touched on some of them already. The demand is skyrocketing. We scratch our heads and go, how can we continue to have a housing shortage? But then you look at tourist areas and you're thinking, well, in some areas, half the houses are Airbnbs. You still have to house the residents. Now you have this Airbnb demand, or hotels, or wherever people are staying. It matters. You need water and energy for all of this. And how are you going to get it there? How are you got to deliver it there? It's got to be available all the time at the flick of a switch for the customer on the other end. I wish I could draw a straight line for people and I could say, if we were just being charged straight rates per kilowatt hour and it were as straightforward as that, I could draw a very straight line for you and explain very clearly what's happening out there. Unfortunately, that's not what's happening. It's not a straight line. It's a very confusing, jiggly, going back and round in circles kind of line. And we're going to get into some more depth here in a little while in part 2 of the episode. We'll get more into the confusing rate structures that we currently have. But in addition to all the things that we've already mentioned, we have this thing called decarbonization. Raise your hand if you've heard that term. Both hands. So what does that really mean? It means that we're getting away from carbon-based or fossil fuels like oil and gas. What that leaves us with is electrical. And people say, oh, electricity is clean, it's perfectly clean because we're using all these green methods. Yes and no. The generation part isn't that straight of a line. Depends on where you are in the country and the time of day. So anyway, we're trying to get away from fossil fuels like oil and gas. And in addition to the so many ways and places that electricity is generated. We generate it with coal still in many places, nuclear, wind, solar, hydroelectric, to just name a few. Governments are setting climate goals that require carbon-free power, which means getting rid of natural gas and combustion engines as a fuel source. So this can be anything from a leaf blower to a lawnmower to an electric car. All of it's being charged on this exact same grid we've been talking about.
I read something somewhere that a 2-stroke lawnmower or a leaf blower being run for a couple hours does such immense damage to the pollution side of things, as opposed to driving a conventional 4-stroke combustion engine, because of the oil that gets mixed into the gasoline, that I'm in favor of electric appliances for lawn mowing, for leaf blowers. and for the noise. The noise of leaf blowers on the weekends is like one of the banes of my existence. You have to be able to supply the power, and that power's got to come from somewhere. In the case of a two-stroke engine, just about anything is better than using a two-stroke, but it's still got to come from somewhere.
Yeah, you make the leaf blower comment, and I crack up because I hear people using the leaf blower all the time as this huge example of if we just got rid of all the leaf blowers, the whole world would be fine. And it's like, well, it's not quite that simple. And I was laughing last weekend because there's a common area in my neighborhood that's right in front of my house. Once a week or once every other week, whatever, they come and they mow and they trim and they use a leaf blower. And they were using an electric leaf blower. I have to hand it to them. They were using electric leaf blower. That thing was just as loud as any two-stroke leaf blower I've ever heard. Because I know that's everybody's complaint. They're so loud. And it's like, this was really loud for an electric leaf blower. Our lawnmower is gas, and we have an electric weed whacker. My husband, he's never had an electric lawnmower. In fact, this house is the first house we've had that's had a lawn in almost 20 years. So when we bought this house, we had to go buy a lawnmower. And there were electric ones, but I think he was a little skittish of them because he's like, I've never used one of these. I have no idea if it's going to be a piece of junk. They kind of look like toys, honestly, in comparison to other lawnmowers. But I got to tell you, our neighbors, a lot of them have electric, and I like them. I kind of wish I had one. If there's an opportunity that comes up to get rid of this one and trade it in for an electric, I think I would be in favor of that. And I do like the electric weed whacker because it's lighter than the gas one. So it's easier for me to use. And I don't care. We have a bunch of batteries. I'll just switch them out. It's no big deal. We have little things like that. And then we have big things like electric cars that we're charging, which take a lot of power. In the last few years, it's also meant that in certain jurisdictions, we're seeing companies that are saying no more natural gas fired equipment or even generators sometimes. Large scale HVAC equipment like boilers and huge hot water heaters, fully electric.
Mm.
That presents some significant design challenges. It presents some grid challenges because any building, residential building, commercial building, you have a service that comes to that building. You have panels that can handle a certain amount of electricity that come into that building. That's all you have. So now if you're having this massive equipment that's all fully electric, your service coming in has to be bigger, which is much more expensive, takes longer to get. And the reason that these things have traditionally been combustion fuel is because the amount of electricity needed to do these functions is massive.
And it's coming down. We're improving electrical technology enormously over the past 30 years. I mean, compare the corded 120 volt Black & Decker drill that I had when my dad bought it in the 90s. As a kid, I would use that drill for projects, to the handheld lithium ion drills we have now with the brushless motors. The amount of spinning power we can create with the amount of power consumed, that's been a huge leap forward to make these kinds of things even feasible at the industrial level that you're talking about with these big boilers and chillers in terms of pumps and all that. We've had some big leaps forward, but there's a minimum threshold of how much energy we're going to be able to get this down to, and it's still pretty darn high. I listened to another podcast. We can jump the shark and talk about another podcast on a podcast for a second, where this guy was talking about a car storage facility where he was going to try to put in as much power as he could for electric cars. This was back in the early days when we thought there were going to be a bunch of electric sports cars, and this guy wanted to build a place that could facilitate that kind of ownership. And just increasing the amperage of the service to his building in Los Angeles from 400 to 500 amps was going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars and months of time to cut up the street, to bring in all this power, to pay for the copper. The amount of work it takes to build out an increase in your building's service rating is enormous and not to be taken lightly.
Well, it can even require the utility to upgrade. I put in a satellite plant on this one campus, and the utility had to go upgrade their stuff first and
Wow.
then bring it to us. It just wasn't even available. So it can be very complicated and quite expensive to do all this stuff. In addition to all the technology we've added and all of our electrical needs in the last 30 years, we're adding a large number of large scale pieces of equipment. So when we talk about electric cars, I just looked up the stats for fun to see how many electric cars we brought on the road in 2024 and how many are on the road in total. So in 2024, 1.3 million electric vehicles were sold. And that's a record. Exponentially, the numbers are going up each year. That brings the total to approximately 4.1 million on the road at the end of 2024. So 4.1 million people are plugging in their cars, 4.1 million households, however you want to look at that. So in addition to all this other stuff, it's not, oh, well, one car, it's only this much times 4.1 million. There's large scale and there's large volume increases. Additionally, we have things that are called data centers. Microchips and data centers are the two big booming industries right now in construction. Things like ChatGPT and AI have massively impacted the demand for the building of more data centers. Faster, faster, faster. I had lunch last week with a company. They cannot even hire people fast enough to get these data centers commissioned and out there. The demand is so high right now because every time you plug something into ChatGPT or you're using AI in any capacity, you're using that data center capacity. I got a good education on how much electricity and water these data centers are really using, and we don't really think about it, especially in terms of water. It was eye-opening. We're using massive amounts of water because data centers require cooling. The processing creates heat, which then has to be cooled. The water systems that cool those are mostly open systems, and so you have tons of evaporation. It's just something to think about as we're going along in life here, that using ChatGPT and AI, you're consuming water and energy.
Nothing is free.
Even as a person who lives in this world of water and energy, I was shocked to find out. I think it's something like you're using 12 ounces of water for every 5 minutes, something like
Which could
that.
be like a conversation effectively on ChatGPT. If you're going to sit down and ask it a couple questions back and forth, according to the paper that I found, it's about like that.
It's just something to think about. How we're using that and using that wisely is probably a great idea to just pause and think about for a minute. So that's the conclusion of part 1 of this episode. Stay tuned for part 2. Thanks for joining us.
Talk to you soon.
At Yellowstone, you can email us with questions, comments, and suggestions at heydee@managementunderconstruction, HEYDEE, to get me or Brad at managementunderconstruction.com.